Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, great. All right, we're gonna get started. If anybody else is waiting to join the graphic novel event. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. At Left Bank Books, we are very excited to have all these illustrators and graphic novel artists here. So let's give them a warm welcome. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I'm just going to give a couple notes. Tonight's event is possible because of your support. So when you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into the local economy, which funds all this, libraries, parks, streets, and everything. So again, thank you so much for shopping local. And we also have a lot of events coming up, so feel free to check out our website to see all of our full list of programming. We are particularly excited about Amal El Mokhtar's new book, River Has Roots, which we'll be hosting at the Schlafly Public Library this Saturday, March 8th at 4 p.m. Okay, so I'm going to be doing some bios here, so whenever I say your name, please wave so everybody knows who you are. So first up is Tracy Butler, who is from Springfield, Massachusetts. She studied biology for a year at Our Lady of Elms College in Massachusetts before returning to art. Creating a website with someone for work led her to join the field of symmetronics with illustration, graphic design, and then moved into 3D character design and animation. And then she came here to St. Louis, purchased a house, and began researching the history of her home, which led to the history of the neighborhood, and then the rich history of St. Louis. And that, combined with her interest in jazz music, created Lackadaisy. Yay! And the next up is John Hendrix, who is a New York Times bestselling author and illustrator. He has so many books. I was reading the list and I was like, there's lots of
You don't need to say all of them.
The most recent, though, I'll say is The Myth Makers. So, yes, also very excited about that book. It's really wonderful. He is the chair of the MFA Illustration and Visual Culture Program at the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University here in St. Louis. And he lives in Webster Grove. All right, so up next is Dmitri Jackson, who is an illustrator and photographer based here in St. Louis. He also serves as an instructional technologist at the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University. He has been featured in many different magazines, and he's also been managing Brooktune Press, an independent publisher of personal comic narratives exploring music, politics, culture, and identity. I'm very excited to start reading the comics. All right, and up next is Jim Ousley, the Eisner-nominated writer of The Atonement Bell, Butcher Queen, and which was published by Red 5 Comics. He also wrote the horror anthology, The Dead Palace, and co-wrote the action comedy anthology, Rough and Tumble. He lives here in St. Louis with his wife, Therese, his kiddos, Jordan and Jace, and his dog, Maisie, who's trying to eat his house. And then Steenz, who will be moderating this event, is the St. Louis-based cartoonist on Ringo Award-nominated syndicated comic Heart of the City and the co-creator of the Dwayne McDuffie Award winner, Archival Quality. The mic, y'all share.
Ooh, I have my own mic.
You have your own special.
All right, everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, also in the back? Okay, great. Just making sure, Well, hi, again, I'm Steenz. I'm a cartoonist, an editor, and professor here in St. Louis. As I said, I do the script Heart of the City. I've done the book Archival Quality, and the latest book is Side Quest, which we'll talk about today. The history of role-playing games, if that is interesting to you, and it should be, because it's interesting. I also edit books with small publishers, and I also teach at Webster University. So today, we're going to be talking about a wide range of topics, considering we all work in a wide range of comics varieties. So we already introduced ourselves, so let's get right into the conversation. My first question is, why comics? You know, there are so many ways to get your ideas across to audiences, from prose to music to dance. Why did comics come to you as the medium of choice? Let's start with Jim and go all the way down.
Okay. For me, I actually tried a lot of stuff like music. I was in bands here in town and theater and stuff. But when I started doing comics, I felt like I came home. That was like the best way to express myself and get my ideas across. So that's why I chose it. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, interestingly for me, I know as a kid, I knew I wanted to be somewhere near drawing and cartooning. And initially thought I was going to be an animator. But then as I got older, I realized I don't quite have the patience to do 24 frames per second and draw 24 frames. So comics sort of represented the best of both worlds. Like I like to draw and I like to write. And so the sense of, I guess, gratification was a little more quicker to get to. And I mean, it's nice to create something and have it live out in the world. Yeah, it just gave more to me.
Similarly, I was an extreme animation nerd as a kid, and that became just my idea of like how you do storytelling. It's visual storytelling, and it's very art inclined. And so in wanting to make animation, I found like, well, obviously I can hire a whole team or a crew of people or fathom how I could do that. So like comics seemed like the answer. And I think I approached it as alternative to animation, but then fell in love with the medium itself because there's so much to it, from the design of the page and the page layout to the lettering to the writing and the drawing of each panel as if it's an illustration. There's so many aspects of art woven into it that it's just kind of enrapturing and all-consuming, and there's just so many disciplines there. And it empowers you to kind of do that visual storytelling as a solo artist, which is kind of, you don't need to, there's no gateway. You can just start making your story and telling it and doing it visually. You don't have to have a publisher. You just have, the internet, or just make it for yourself. And so, yeah, that was why comics.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing. Like the cool thing about comics is like you're a one-person filmmaker. You get to tell the story, but unfortunately, you're also like screenplay writer and the costume designer and the cinematographer,
Researcher.
publicist, researcher. Yeah, right. But the power of just like I can sit down in my basement and tell any story I want in any place in my imagination. That's awesome, And then of course, 10 years later, you'll be done. But like if you can get through that, pain barrier, it truly is one of the best medias because of the control the author has of the story.
Yeah, I like it for a lot of reasons. I think the main reason is I think I was able to make people laugh more with comics. I didn't realize how important it was for me to make people laugh until I started getting people laughing at my comics, and I was like, what is this feeling? Is this happiness? So yeah, I really love that. And growing up with animation and reading comics as a young person as well, it just felt like this was the way to go. Apparently, my mom always tells people, oh, Steenz has always wanted to be an artist ever since they were little. I'll have to take her word for it. But I definitely didn't really get into the comics aspect until after high school. And that's when I had more opportunity to focus on comics instead of schoolwork, basically. It's pretty standard, actually, that so many of us have always been interested in art and comics and animation since we were children. Can you talk about the ways that art was introduced to you as a young person, specifically in the K through 12 era of your life? Let's start with John first, actually.
I mean, I was basically traumatized by the 5-paragraph essay in elementary school, and it would stun the 12-year-old version of me that I am an author, that I write as part of my practice. And I was constantly asking a teacher, whatever that writing project is, can I make a creative project out of it? I made a board game out of To Kill a Mockingbird. I made a comic out of Romeo and Juliet. I just anything besides writing. So it's really stunning to me that I didn't realize that writing and reading were so paired. I wish, looking back, I wish someone could have helped me make that connection early on. But it started with reading books and it ended up in pictures.
I don't think until I started drawing comics, I realized how much print comics and newspapers, how much effect they had on me, like Calvin and Hobbes and
The
Peanuts
golden
and
era.
things like that. Yeah, there was a time in the 90s, mid 90s or so, when I think syndicated comics really peaked. And then later on, in school, I just trying to survive school. I think my defense or my survival mechanism was drawing all through class and drawing all in my notes and drawing all over my book covers, the ones you have to make out of grocery bags and things. And it just filled my time, and my imagination was always thinking of stories as I was drawing. And so that's kind of was my self-introduction to it. My family wasn't super thrilled with that as a career path, but it was just where my heart was.
Well, actually, as a kid, I moved around a lot, and I was mostly homeschooled, so not a lot of access to public school art education. So a lot of that came from Saturday morning cartoons. Pretty much raised on Schoolhouse Rock and all that stuff. Looney Tunes, Roadrunner, and then going to the bookstore and tracking down the coolest looking, how to draw animals, how to draw, comic strips for, stuff like that. So over time, just reading those books, buying those books, and just kind of picking it up as I go until I got to school and got proper education.
For me, when I was a kid, I only cared about four things really: Star Wars, Batman, the Archies, and Fat Albert, and the Cosby Kids, which I know isn't something that is good to talk about these days. But Fat Albert, I wanted to be in the Fat Albert jump floor. You know what I mean? It was a weird kid. So,
What was your favorite?
oh my God, Fat Albert, man. Yeah. I do a really good imitation. I'm not going to do it here. I do a really good imitation, but my kids like it. But for me, Saturday morning cartoons certainly. But with Archie, my mom, she passed away last year actually. But our big unifying thing we both loved was Archie comics, and that was my gateway into comics, and loving comics. And from there, my dad brought home a Batman comic. It was a really old one. It was from '69 or something like that. But he brought it home, and I still have it. It's in tatters, but I keep it because it just reminds me of the magic I felt. Because I feel like all of us may have been maybe shy kids, maybe slightly introverted, maybe. I know I was. And comics and other comics fans helped me feel not so alone in a really cold, hectic world.
Yeah, I grew up really being encouraged to draw and watch cartoons. One of my favorite memories is me and my twin would watch Sailor Moon while dinner was being cooked. And then we'd all eat dinner while watching Dragon Ball Z. And then we eat dessert with Justice League. So it was just
It was inevitable.
yeah. Having a family that was really into that sort of stuff. My dad loved D&D. My mom was a huge Trekkie. So I just grew up in a nerd household, which was really interesting because by the end of high school, they're like, you need to go to school for math. You're good at math and that will give you money. So, and I was like, but I don't like math like that. So even though I was taking all the classes, reading all the books, every how to draw book, I picked that up from the library, but when it came to the actual career aspect, they were like, art? I don't know. So thankfully I got a scholarship and they were like, oh, right, yeah, do what you want to do. But it was really valuable to have parents who encouraged me to do the things that I loved, even if, it didn't mean I would be an artist when I grew up. But we did talk a little bit about education and arts education. I do have a question specifically for the educators on this panel. What do you think the value of art school is? I mean, we know that it's super expensive. That's just a fact, right? But what does art academics have going for it? Why should you do it? There may be some students in the audience who are interested in knowing, what the honest discussion is around art school.
Yeah, I think it's totally fair. People online were trying to take art school and like atomize it into YouTube videos that you could watch. Like the desire to be like, I can get the skill acquisition without the big price tag. And I actually really understand that. I think the thing that you don't get in art school is kind of obvious, but often goes unnoticed, and that's just simply community. And like our work always gets better in community. It was actually one of the lessons of this book, actually, that when we share our work with others, there is a kind of third magic thing there that you can't get by being by yourself. And it's one of the weird liturgies our culture has with artists where like, you're alone, you're a genius, you should be sad and miserable, and you should be suspicious of other people because they might steal your ideas. And I have taught now for 20 years, I run a graduate program, and being together in a studio space with people who are co-laboring in the idea of telling good stories, it is so valuable, and you just cannot get that online. And so that's why I tell people, go to art school for mentors, for peers, for that community, basically.
Yeah, second, the community is super important. I mean, when you look back, just at like all of art movements throughout history, like they didn't just get created in a vacuum. You know what I mean? Like the networking that you do that is available for you to do is such a golden opportunity, and you're able to, like, regardless of what creative practice that you may pursue in art school, there's so many other adjacent practices and artists that have hybrid interests in multiple things. It can inspire you in your own work and give you clarity about what you would like to do. Yeah, it's such a crucial element to art school.
Yeah, I think what you learn in art school is the same thing you learn if you are not in art school, but you just learn it faster. You've got the time and the space to really focus on getting your skills better and not worry about paying bills and having to live life. So I think that is a part of it. And if you're really trying to get that out of art, then yes, definitely go to art school. But YouTube Academy is real. I've definitely learned all of Clip Studio from tutorials. I learned how to put books together through the actual act of making a graphic novel. So, while obviously community and camaraderie is great, it is valuable, I think there is also, you can get that outside of school too. So when you're thinking about if you want to go to art school or not, just think about that. What do you want to accomplish, and when do you want to accomplish it? Because if you were like, I want to know this now because I have all these ideas, maybe art school is the place for you, But if you're like, art is something that I'm passionate about, but is not something I'm totally sure, where I want to go with it, maybe hold off a little bit until you know exactly what you want to do with it and where you want to go with it. Because being mired with debt does suck, and it is a reality we have to always remind ourselves of, we were talking about learning online. I also learned a lot about webcomics through my online community. My first book, Archive of Quality, was actually set and ready to be a webcomic until we decided to pitch it to a publisher. So I would love to hear from Tracy and Dmitri about the value of webcomics, especially in a day where social media seems to be crashing all around us. Do you see like a future where webcomics kind of has a comeback at all?
Ladies first.
I think actually webcomics has, when I started doing Lackadaisy, it was kind of this viewed as this illegitimate form of comics. Like it was very frowned upon, like something awful was like the at the forefront of the internet culture at that time. And they were very mean to webcomics. And you were just like kind of like looked down on as because there's no gateway,
Yeah.
like there is with publishing, there's no one you can just put your comic out there. So yeah, quality will vary, and a lot of people end up abandoning their comics and things like that. But I mean, just as fertile ground for so many cool things to happen, I think it's proved itself, and it's now. I mean, I'm not gonna advocate for Webtoon exactly right now, but it's very big. And now you're seeing producers and book publishers and things go to those places looking for new content, new ideas. And so that's, I think it has self-validated in that way, and it's become a much more like valid form of making art and telling stories in the public perception. Obviously, if you were ever making comics, you always knew it was valid, but yeah, I think, and personally, I didn't really know anything about comics when I started making comic. I just kind of jumped in the deep end and found out I had to start swimming or I was gonna not make it. So it was a bit of a trial by fire in that way, but I learned so much, and then people started expressing interest in print comic versions of the comic I was putting out for free anyway. And I was like, I really hadn't considered even doing that because I just didn't think I was professional enough or that it was good enough. It was just something I wanted to do. And then you just kind of find, oh, well, I guess I have a marketable thing here. and people want to buy books of a thing I already made for free. And they do. And I honestly think I never would have sold a book if I hadn't just made my comic available to people. And now, it's got a fan base, and I've been able to support animated projects based on it and everything. So webcomics all the way, yeah.
I think it's really important to start when you have the idea, just like you said.
Hit while the iron's hot.
Exactly.
Yeah,
don't wait until you're good enough.
Yeah, that's a route to eternal procrastination.
That's right.
There is no such good
Never
enough.
save
Like,
ideas.
it
Like
never-
if you think like, oh, that's a good idea, I'll save it for when.
No, just do it.
Just
Yeah.
do it.
Because you'll get other ideas.
And you'll hate it. You'll eventually.
Yeah, exactly. You'll regret it entirely.
Right, you'll know if it works or not.
Yes.
But,
Kind of similar to Tracy, I think my journey into webcomics is similar. I just jumped in and just figured it out as I went. And I think, it's sometimes you have to do that. You have to do that to figure out who you are as an artist and what you like. I'm kind of old school with the webcomics. I miss the old days of like WordPress, where you were an artist, you had control of your content, and you had to know how to code. You had to, get your account, and you would be in charge of like, when your work posts and all that stuff. I'm personally wary of platforms like Webtoons because, platforms like those, they make it super easy for people to get started making comics and putting their work out there. But to me, it's like a point where it's like there's so much of the same stuff. It's like everything just looks like nothing.
Signing contracts with that sort of thing. It's a little
Right.
fraud.
It's nuts. And then, you're not in charge of where the content is housed. And something could happen. The capital running these companies could disappear and your work could go with it. So yeah, I'm always keep hold of your work, hold on to your work and be in charge of what you do. And that was the appeal for me with webcomics in the beginning. And again, there's so many out there. I'm just kind of gotten out of the loop. And it can be hard to keep up, but I think at the end of the day, you have something that is a really nice addition to your portfolio to say, hey, I can keep a deadline. I can, create all this stuff in a pretty quick pace. I can be a professional. And I think for me, the biggest dividend doing a webcomic, like in my case, was Black West Boulevard. I know for sure the biggest dividend was firstly seeing the amount of support from readers, people in my circle showing support, my name getting out there a little better, and even kind of led me to what I do working at WashU. A lot of my teachers sort of followed my work when it was still continuing, still going on, and that's how they let me teach comics because they seen my work, thought it was good, and was like, hey, you want to, teach for us? And so, one thing led to another. And so it's definitely, if you're persistent enough and you persevere enough, you will see like dividends come to you. But you just got to stay focused.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a journey, not for the squeamish.
Yeah, I mean, self-publishing in general is just a journey, to say the least, It is another avenue to get your work done, self-publishing or small publishers. It is not all just the big five of Macmillan and Scholastic and Simon & Schuster. In fact, I would say some of these bigger publishers are kind of late in the game as to how to make comics, to be honest, and I could have a whole panel talking about that. So I wonder if Jim, Tracy, you can talk a little bit about how self-publishing and small press in general has helped your career specifically.
Yeah, want to go first?
Yeah, please go.
You sure? Okay. I should have thought ladies first. Yeah. But yeah, when you do self-publishing, you're basically giving yourself a shot. You're not waiting for someone else to knock on your door because there's so much stuff out there. And competing for everyone's attention, and that's publishers and everyone else. If you don't self-publish, when I self-published something, that led to being published by a publisher, a small publisher, but it led to all kinds of opportunities that I never would have had if I would have waited for someone to do it. So like everyone's been saying, if you have an idea and you think it's worthy of getting out there, self-publish, man, get that out there. It's the hardest part. Writing and doing art it's very difficult. It is hard work, but there's a whole other level of hard work, and that's like promoting and getting your stuff out there. And you really learn about that when you self-publish. So that's been my experience. It's been a good one, but it's just it's not for the weak, as you say.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of downsides, but a lot of really good side aspects. Like one of the downsides would be you have to be your own marketing department and PR person, and you have to be out there like self-promoting and doing all those things and making ads for your own things and letting people know you're going to conventions and scheduling your own convention appearances and buying dealer space and things like that if you want to do all that sort of thing. Personally, I ended up doing the layout and editing of all my own books too for print. So yeah, and sometimes like the small publisher just doesn't have the budget or means to do that, but sometimes that needs more power of how things turn out in your hands, which is fantastic. And then the publisher hopefully is doing the printing and kind of taking on the risk of the printing costs and hoping that they will be able to recoup that and then also share in some revenue with you. I tend to think some of the just baseline, some of the contracts you get with smaller publishers are more equitable too, more egalitarian. And you don't have to meet a certain kind of really, really high bar for sales and things for you to be considered a success. And for a lot of small indie public or people just coming into comics, you don't really expect to come out of the gate super, successful right immediately, going viral and things like that. And so you can kind of grow, and hopefully the publishing company grows too as you're doing that, and you can kind of expand from there. So yeah, I didn't have when I started doing Lackadaisical, as you know, as a webcomic, and then it attracted some interest because it had enough views and things on it. People, I guess, were looking at the analytics or whatever. And small publishers started approaching me, going, "Are you interested in making this?" And so I kind of had the option to pick what was the best, most creator-friendly contract agreement. And that's how I ended up with Iron Circus Comics, which has been marvelous. And it's a more personable relationship that I have with the person who runs the company and the printers and the print techs and things like that. And I can kind of decide what the cover looks like, decide what materials it's made out of and things like that. So yeah, I don't sell books in the hundreds of thousands, and but nobody gets into comics to get rich anyway. It's kind of it's a success. If you get your thing made and you tell your story, I think you've got to give yourself that credit because that's hard to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about one of the first mini comics that I put out was a fan comic for Encyclopedia Brown, and anytime I go to class visits and ask anybody to read Encyclopedia Brown, there's like maybe one person. But that one person is enough for me to be like, you get it. And so even though it was a project that was very much just for fun, it ended up attracting an editor who saw that I could take a character and make it for a new audience, which got me my syndication job. So I always say, if you have the idea, just put it out. It's going to be difficult. The road is rough, but it'll be worth it in the end, whether you love the end product or not, Jim, or no, actually, I'm not going to talk to you yet.
Okay.
Yeah, let's skip. John.
Yeah. Sorry.
I want to talk about the way your book is done. Your book has sequential pages, spot illustrations, and prose all into one book. Can you talk about what your method of combining all of these artistic tools in to get one story across? How did that work out?
Yeah, I don't know if I would advise that strategy. I basically like to make books for the 13-year-old version of me. Like I learn in a very synthetic way, and I loved like those magazines like Zoo Books or David Macaulay, The Way Things Work, things that had images and explanations and text and pictures and graphs and it's just, I like receiving information that way. So all of my books take something, a subject matter that I think most people, if you ask them, do they know about this? You'd be like, oh yeah, I know that. Like, oh, did you know Lewis and Tolkien were friends? And be like, oh yeah, I knew that. They were in the Inklings. And then that's kind of like where it stops. And so I love taking that little bit of knowledge and then sort of opening it up for people in this hybrid form of pictures and words and images. And I think it kind of makes it more sticky in your mind. And I like giving people usable histories that they can take with them and, just sort of wherever they are, whether it's middle grade readers, which is who this is written for. I hear also from a lot of adults who are like, wow, I thought I knew that story, or I thought I knew the story of how Hitler came to power, or I'm working on the Salem witch trials next. And that's another one where I bet you think you know that story. And I'm here to tell you, you do not know that story. And anyway. And also, I want to draw a horror book for kids. So yeah, that's the goal, right? Is the sticky, usable history that you can have. And I think text, words, and images do that together.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it reminded me of the work that I put into Side Quest, which is also an educational book as well. And I think
Nonfiction, man. It's having a moment.
Nonfiction. I love it. It's hard, but I love it. And thinking about how people retain information, I think we're just looking out for everyone who learns in different ways. If you need that visual element, you got it. If you need the words, you got it. So that's why I think that comics, especially nonfiction comics, are sometimes better than textbooks, because it gives you more visual to remember different pieces of information.
Well, and there's a phrase in elementary education, the reluctant reader, and it's always usually it's like boys. They don't want to read the book, and so they give them the graphic novel. And frankly, there's plenty of adults that are like this, right? No one reads books anymore. I've had so many people be like, I've always wanted to read that 600-page biography on Tolkien, and like, frankly, I never would pick that up, right? And so there is actually a way to transmit information that I think is not diminishing information, but actually expanding it because it uses images, right? It's a third kind of language that I think is what comics does.
Okay, I'm coming back to you. Okay, great. You talked about the value of having an editor.
Yeah.
Some folks may not know what having an editor can really do for your work. You've also worked with a lot of collaborators in your years of being a creative. Can you talk about why collaboration is great and why having others work with you on comics is such a valuable asset?
Well, for me, I'm just a writer. I can't draw anything. I can only draw two things, really. It's a stick figure and a penis. That's all that I can really do. That's literally the extent of my artistic talent. So I
Does that mean you sign your books?
No, but that's a good idea. But I do love collaborating with artists. It's always an adventure because it's you want the artist to be happy, but you want your story to be told in the way that you think. And I've been lucky for the most part in working with collaborators who've been very giving and understanding. There's been no like big problems I've ever experienced with the collaborator, which is nice. As far as an editor is concerned, I tend to have I have the propensity for overusing comments.
Same.
Yeah, and Sarah, I don't even know why, but my editor, Jason Green, who I met at Ink and Drink Comics here in St. Louis, he edits all my stuff, and he's amazing because he catches my comments. Sometimes I'm typing so fast that I'm not, well, I'm thinking so fast, my fingers aren't keeping up, so I'll drop a word here and there. He'll find those, but perhaps most importantly, what he does, and this happens occasionally, but he'll say, you know what, this moment here, there's never plus stuff, it's just moments. There's a moment here that doesn't quite ring true. And he'll just either tell me that or he'll say like, oh, what about this? And about 80% of the time I take his advice because he's just so sharp. And I feel lucky that I have somebody like him. I'd love to have you edit something, but I don't want to stress you out with all those comments.
I'm pretty busy. So we have a little bit of time left before we get to the signing Q&A. Is that a thing? Are we doing a Q&A? Okay. So we got some time left. But I do want to ask one last question for us before we get into that is, having collaborators and working with editors, this is all some form of creative support. But there's also financial support that would be nice too. And there's a lot of arts funding and cultural initiatives that are being attacked and resources are being gutted. And I want to know, how do you as creators fight back against this form of censorship? What are we losing as a community if we're not supporting the arts? Let's start with Tracy.
Yeah, I think it's extremely tragic and infuriating when, say, social media platforms start censoring certain words and you can't talk about certain topics. And I fear that things may get worse before they get better under the current circumstances. But I think going back to what you were saying about being in control of your own space on the internet, I think that's very important. All the while that I've used social media and things like that for self-promotion and announcing to people that there's a comic update and things like that, I've always maintained my own website, my own web presence, so that if somebody pulls the rug out from underneath you, if Twitter becomes X, then you still have that space where you are and you're in control and you have your own website that, so people can still find you at least, and you have an archive of your work there. But going further than that, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to speak up and throw support behind people who are doing things that are now considered on the fringes, like people who are doing not safe for work art or adult comics and things like that. I'll point out things like Oh Joy Sex Toy and things like that, where they keep getting chased off of platforms. And it's very disparaging and to see that, because if they get that out of the public eye, they're going after the next thing. So even if you don't do adult art, support that art. And you can, there's still avenues to do that. Sometimes it's directly, sometimes it's like Ko-fi or just, sharing links, or it's Patreon or things like that. But again, like a lot of those platforms, they start getting, they start losing ad revenue. And so they start pulling back and censoring things as well. And so, find the avenues you can to support them and speak up on their behalf when you can, even if it's not the kind of thing you're making.
Dmitri, you know anything like that?
Well, I think, the interesting thing about censorship sometimes doesn't even come from like the people at the top that are shutting down sites. Sometimes they can come from like artists themselves that are directly attacking artists for, the ideas and concepts that they're putting in their work. And just to, humiliate them and put them on like some kind of very dark campaign to defame them and destroy their reputation and their name, So it's like multiple fronts happening for artists at the time. And it's very tricky waters to wade through. It's something that I almost think it kind of goes in cycles. Sometimes there's like a huge moment of chaos and conflict, and then eventually, like, I'm trying to be hopeful. But eventually, right. So, and eventually there's a moment where the community of creators come together and they can, fight back. They can, do what they need to push this opposition aside. And eventually, the pendulum will swing. If it's, right now it's kind of like super duper conservative now, but eventually, culture changes, events happen in the world, and it swings their way. And at that point, it's all about just staying the course, being patient, and just talking it out. Because you really have nothing else at that point.
I also think it's really important to support the arts for the youth. Visual literacy is a form of literacy. You have to be able to look at an image and know what it's saying to you. Otherwise, you're going to get got by propaganda. You're going to get got by AI, so you have to be able to understand what these images are meaning and what they're saying. And from that, you can move forward and be more educated.
Also, I think, just the existence of art is important because art teaches empathy, authoritative regimes, what do they hate? They hate art. Who did Nazis hate? They hate artists. They hate art. And so, you have to, are there any writers or artists in the audience right now? A lot, yeah. Well, I just wanted to tell you, I just wanted to say this, don't let anyone ever tell you that what you do is not worthy of anyone's time, that you shouldn't put things out. Because society needs art, it's the one thing that if you love it, it unifies us. It really does. It teaches us things like hope and empathy, and even if it doesn't have any sort of societal gravity to it, even if it's just fun, you're giving someone in a really harsh world, you're taking them away for a little while. And there's a real magic to that. It really is. So just keep on going and supporting each other, important stuff.
Yeah, I think maybe I would just offer the advice that artists are often very self-focused, and a good counter to that, and I tell this to my students, is find an institution actually that you can invest in, that is not just about you, but about a greater idea. I have chosen to invest at WashU, right? And there's a lot of things that you can criticize about large institutions. But at some point, you will contribute some part of your life to a large organization that will help other people. And that could be Slice, that could be the Graphic Artists Guild. But find a place to contribute to a greater cause of other people. It's a way to stop being so depressed, actually. Because artists are so alone all the time in our work. You have to work alone so much to make good art. And man, do you need other people.
Okay. Thank you guys for listening to us talk about art and comics. Hopefully it was worth your time. Yes? Okay, great. We did it. So now for the time for maybe like one or two questions from the audience. Okay. Any good cues? Oh yeah, thank you. In the yellow blazer. Yeah.
I have a question for Tracy and a more general question for everyone. Lackadaisy is set in St. Louis, and you obviously did a lot of research about St. Louis to write Lackadaisy. There's a lot of really rich, juicy details in there. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your approach to that research, and if there was anything that you found that surprised you. And my more general question for everyone is, how has living in St. Louis affected your approach to your work?
Great question.
Oh, shit. It was really a pretty self-indulgent journey, really. I mean, it's research is kind of an ongoing thing because you can never know everything about the 1920s, which is when Lackadaisy is set, or everything about a given city. It's just a sprawling story unto itself. But I bought an old house in a historic neighborhood. I got a little obsessed with the neighborhood's history, and that kind of just expanded into being interested in St. Louis history in general. And I just really never appreciated where I lived up until that point. And then you just start digging down into everything, and it's like, wow, St. Louis was such a big deal at one point. And it was like the fourth largest city in the country at one point. Everybody thought it was the up and coming city, and the Olympics here in 1904 and the World's Fair, and it was fighting with Chicago for that, second city title. But it lost. But it's such an interesting story getting there, and tragic and sad, and there's so much pathos there, but also so much triumph and just interesting, weird things that have happened. And the whole idea of there being this massive cave system under the city that's basically been destroyed by the construction of 55 and the other interstate highways. It was so interesting to me. There's just so much lore wrapped up in that, going back to the indigenous people and how they used those caves, and then how the Germans came here and they're like, oh, this is perfect for lagering, and that's how St. Louis became a beer town. And then just criminals using it to traffic alcohol during Prohibition, and the way Prohibition destroyed so many businesses here, and affected people's lives. That all just became so interesting to me that I was just like, I can't think of writing anything else right now. I just have to kind of.
You should do a book about that.
Yeah. Maybe a comic. But yeah, and just all of the art movements and everything at the time, and St. Louis had some of the first skyscrapers even, and just some really interesting things. And you just kind of like, you live there, so it seems so banal to you, but then you start taking a microscope to it and digging around and looking at the ruins of these past things, and just it's like, wow, so many things happened here. It's just an important place for monumentous things happened here, and people forget that, and so you just go looking for it. It's considered flyover country, but if you just dig around and go to visit some historic spots and go see where some interesting people were born, and it's really, there's treasure everywhere. So yeah, definitely recommend taking an interest in where you live. Probably more interesting.
There's a toasted ravioli hidden somewhere in here. You won't find it. That's my panelist pitch.
I think being in St. Louis has kind of helped my non-creative work, so not my comics work, but my community work. So I also run Slice, which is the St. Louis Independent Comics Expo. And I don't know, I always feel like having one hand in front of you and one hand behind you to pull someone with you is a very Midwestern way to live. I just kind of treat everyone like we're already friends. We've been neighbors, so this is my homie. And I think having that feeling is what helps me be a better community builder, is by encouraging people to do the stuff that they want to do, whether it's their first comic or their 100th.
There was another question about St. Louis and why this is what is it about St. Louis that affects your work. I actually wrote the telenovela takes place in St. Louis, and a big reason that I said it in St. Louis was because of the racial history of the city. There's so many things that have happened in the city that are not taught in schools. It's completely ignored, and it was basically a response to my family, because my family never wants to talk about that stuff, and unlike the liberal weirdo of the family, and so I wanted to write a story that illustrated how I felt, and a lot of it has to do with also like the Roman Catholic Church, Irish Catholics, and how that is interwoven with that, and with racism and everything else. And it was really important for me to write that story and get it off my chest, because I do love the city. One thing I love about St. Louis is that there are always possibilities. There's always a place to go, and you do have to fight for that a lot, but it is possible. Like, one thing that I hate is when people move to like the coast or whatever, and something will happen in St. Louis, and they'll go, "Come on, St. Louis," and I'll say, you know what? It'd be easier if you stayed here, and you could like help us, be a good person that represents people and everything else. But yeah, I agree with you. That's how the city kind of affected me.
And kind of to add to that, I think like in my case, my work, this book takes place in a record store. There's a lot of focus on music. I think the majority of my music education is basically scouring the library and finding all the classic albums that they talk about. That wouldn't have happened without the accessibility to the county libraries in my neighborhood. And a lot of that is sort of what fuels that the excitement of finding and discovering is kind of infused in the work. And even like the history, the musical history of St. Louis is always a surprise. Like, looking up people like, Chuck Berry and Scott Joplin, and even, what we're saying, right? And then Angel Olsen, apparently she was going to St. Louis, which is pretty cool. But like, there's so many like different people with different musical avenues that they take, and they started here. And it's something about the city that just allows that sort of blossoming to happen. And you can kind of find your own light and see it to the end. But yeah, it's so many like little bitty treasures in the city when it comes to music. A lot of people, I think, in the national level, doesn't really give St. Louis a lot of credit for. We tend to be seen as like flyover country, but there's a lot of creative musical juices flowing in the city. And Lou got something to say.
Any last words? Okay, sick. All right, well, it's time for a really cool part where we sign books. Yeah, we love books. So I really want to thank everyone again for coming to this. We really appreciate it. We love talking about comics, and I had a lot of fun talking with these folks. I hope you guys had a lot of fun. So let's give a round of applause. A round of applause for you coming to an event in St. Louis. It's so rainy. So thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. We're gonna take a quick 5-minute break to get the table set up for signing. So please walk around, talk to somebody new. We have books for sale up at the front counter. And I do have one event to tell you about real quick. On Thursday, April 10th at 6 p.m., Matt Kint and Margie Kraft Kint are releasing their book Guilt Frame, which is another graphic novel. So check it out on our website. Anyway, thanks so much for coming.
Yay.
Thank you. And I will go grab this table.
It's her.